Cannabis stocks are at a multi-year low, with the Alternative Harvest ETF down 67% from its 2018 high, but that could all be changing in a few months. Two factors are lining up that could take marijuana stocks to new highs and bring investors back into these shares. In this video, I'll show you what those factors are, when to invest, and reveal 3 cannabis stocks that I'm buying right now. We're talking pot stocks today on Let's Talk Money. Hey Bowtie Nation, Joseph Hogue here with the Let's Talk Money channel. I want to send a special shout out to all you in the nation. Thank you for spending a part of your day to be here. If you're not part of that community yet, just click that little red subscribe button. It's free and you'll never miss an episode. Nation, since the first companies in medical marijuana listed on the exchanges a few years ago, it's been a wild ride for investors. An $80 billion market in the US alone, investors have rushed in on any news or hope for legalization. And if you look at this chart of GW Pharmaceuticals, a cannabis therapeutics company, the share price shows this cycle of hype and then the crushing letdown. That first major wave of legislation in 2014 put legalization in the ballot on 15 states and took the shares rocketing up 153% through mid-2015. This was all only to crash back down to earth in the next year. The next wave of legislation had a longer lasting effect on the share price, but even that is worn off and the market has again lost interest. But two factors have lined up that could take cannabis-related stocks back to their peaks, bring back that hike, and make investors a lot of money. That means now could be the time to get back into this theme before the rest of the market, and I'm buying 3 stocks that we'll talk about today. The first factor here is the higher likelihood that the Democrats take the presidency and have complete control of Congress next year, a change that would give them a free hand at passing legislation. Now, this isn't a political video. Those of you in the nation know I've never made this channel about politics. Here, I'm just sharing recent polling and want to help you get ahead of what could be a huge change this year. The overall consensus view for marijuana legalization has completely flipped over the last 50 years, now with 67% of Americans in favor. That support is even higher among Democrats. In a study by the Harvard Institute of Politics, Democrats favored legalization by almost 2-to-1 margin, while the majority of Republicans opposed a change to the law. Democratic candidate Joe Biden has an average lead of 8% in polls according to Real Clear Politics, and the consensus now puts odds of him winning the White House at 65% in November. But maybe more significant is the consensus now has the Democrats retaking the Senate in November, which would give them complete control of Congress as well. The U.S. House of Representatives passed the SAFE Act last September to clarify federal rules around banking for cannabis companies. Now, a lot of retailers, even larger companies, have been squeezed for funding because a lot of the traditional banks just won't lend, so that legislation is seen as a big step, but it was just dead on arrival in the Senate. And with the Democratic control of both chambers next year, this legislation is likely to come back and bring a lot of funding into those marijuana companies. Even if that doesn't happen though, if President Trump holds the White House or if the Republicans keep the majority in the Senate, this next factor could override everything. The lockdowns this year mean states are dangerously underfunded from a loss of sales and other taxes, along with higher costs related to containing the pandemic. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities estimates state funding shortfalls of 10% in fiscal 2020, which usually ends in June for most states, and 25% in the 2021 budget year. That could add up to a budget hole of $550 billion over the 3-year period, with the 2021 budget gap the largest in decades. Every state will be hit here, with Arizona expecting a revenue loss of $1.4 billion. California is estimating a $32 billion shortfall, equal to 37% of its general budget and more than 3 times the amount in its rainy day fund. Now, since states aren't allowed deficit spending, they have to balance their budgets every year. This shortfall means tens of billions in public services are going to be cut unless they can somehow make up that money. And I'm thinking legalized marijuana. Of the 10 states with legalized cannabis in 2018, taxes on sales were as high as 37% above the normal sales tax, and 3 states saw increased revenue over $200 million. Just last year, Colorado passed $1 billion in total state revenue from legalization. States are going to be looking for a way to plug that budget gap, and it could lead to another major wave of legalization. So let's look at the biggest players in these cannabis stocks. 3 stocks I'm buying ahead of this theme, but first I wanted to highlight the ETFMG Alternative Harvest ETF. That's ticker MJ, obviously. This marijuana fund started trading in 2015, but has seen the same weakness as the rest of the market and is now down 60% in the last year. While I usually love ETFs for that instant diversification and just the ease of investing, I don't feel like this one is your best bet on the theme. The fund charges a 0.75% expense ratio, which is extremely high for an ETF. Also, though, since the industry is pretty small, the fund only holds 37 stocks, so it's not like you can't replicate this on your own with maybe 10 or 15 of those marijuana stocks. Now, with what could be a rush of investor sentiment into these marijuana stocks, the fund will probably do well, as shares give you that instant diversification across the theme, but I still think your best bet is going to be looking at the best of breed among the group. First on our list is $2.3 billion Cronos Group, ticker CRON, one of the largest marijuana companies out there. Now, Cronos sells both medical and recreational cannabis, with most of its revenue coming from the Canadian market, but also with some exports to Poland and Germany. And the company looks like it has the jump on the industry in terms of that international strategy, though, with some great joint ventures in Europe, Latin America, and Australia. Basically, it's setting up the local cultivation and the distribution in these regions and is soon going to have a fairly strong global presence. Another advantage of Cronos over its peers is it's got a huge cash reserve, so that survivability that we've been talking about on the channel over these last few months. Thanks to a $1.8 billion investment from Altria Group, the company has more than $1.3 billion in balance sheet cash and no debt. That could be a huge advantage for growth and acquisitions as the rest of its competitors kind of struggle to conserve cash. That investment by Altria gave it 45% of the company with an option to pick up another 10% stake in the future. Now, these big stakes always catch my attention because anything close to that 50% ownership is almost always a bid to make for an easy acquisition down the road. Analyst price targets range from $4.81 on the low side to as high as $10 per share, and I think the shares could go even higher if that investor hype returns. Next here is another of the largest cannabis stocks, $4.2 billion GW Pharmaceuticals, ticker GWPH. GW Pharma is focused on the medicinal side of the market with its cannabinoid treatments for epilepsy and MS. The company had a really strong launch for its Epidiolex treatment of childhood seizures last year with an estimated $296 million in sales. Net sales jumped 200% to $120 million in the first quarter of this year versus the same period in 2019. The company's seizure treatment was approved in the EU late last year, so it should continue to add to that revenue number. It's also seen some encouraging results from a Sativex product to treat that multiple sclerosis and could get approval this year. Like most marijuana stocks, earnings are still pretty horrible to look at here, but expected to turn positive next year. That could help prove the investment and bring investors rushing back in. Analyst price targets range from $140 a share to as high as $275 per share over the next year, double where the stock trades now. The largest cannabis stock by market size, $6.4 billion Canopy Growth, ticker CGC, is one of my favorite plays on the potential for federal legalization. And the reason is Canopy closed a deal last year to buy U.S. acreage contingent on federal legalization, and this kind of foresight could be about to pay off big time. Acreage Holdings has licenses in 20 states, including 87 dispensaries and 22 cultivation sites, which could give Canopy a huge U.S. footprint. Right now, the company books more than 80% of its sales in Canada, with the rest coming from production licenses in about a dozen other countries. The U.S. growth, though, would add significantly to the top line and eventually flow through to earnings. Now, like Cronos, Canopy has a pristine balance sheet with over $2 billion Canadian dollars in cash reserves against just $450 million in long-term debt. Now, a lot of this is from an investment from $37 billion liquor giant Constellation Brands, which owns 37% of the company. Analyst targets range from just above $13 a share on the low side to $23 per share over the next year. Click on the video to the right for my 3 favorite penny stocks to buy right now. 3 small cap stocks for triple-digit returns. Don't forget to join the Let's Talk Money community by tapping that subscribe button and clicking the bell notification.